The old rich guy in town, which is the United States, has been very suspicious about the Belt and Road Initiative. No? So if you read the State Department, if you read the Biden administration, etc., they have been very critical of the BRI and highlighting lots of traps, debt trap, technology trap, lots of traps. But by the way, the United States have been trying to copy the BRI and trying to do something similar like China 10 years later. The United States has found out that BRI has been very successful. Today, the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, 10 years ago, 11 years now, in 2013, it started as the One Belt and One Road Initiative. We tried to link BRI with the concept of a process of globalization with Chinese characteristics. If you visit China every year, every 6 months, you will find hundreds of new infrastructure projects, from airports to ports to highways to metros to hospitals to schools to whatever. And so BRI is highly linked with infrastructure projects, interconnectivity, no? And the main institution from an international perspective to coordinate infrastructure projects, Chinese infrastructure projects globally, is the Belt and Road Initiative. So the BRI is something like an umbrella institution that coordinates hundreds of Silk Road. You have the new maritime Silk Road, the digital Silk Road, the cultural Silk Road, the educational Silk Road, the trade, lots of different initiatives. And under BRI, you have also institutions such as the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, etc., etc. So BRI attempts to coordinate, since 2013, this process of globalization with Chinese characteristics, and links concretely to Latin America, for example, not only, but mainly through infrastructure projects all over Latin America. No? This is based on China's experience. The old rich guy in town, which is the United States, has been very suspicious about the Belt and Road Initiative. No? So if you read the State Department, if you read the Biden administration, etc., they have been very critical of the BRI and highlighting lots of traps, debt trap, technology trap, lots of traps. But by the way, the United States have been trying to copy the BRI and trying to do something similar like China 10 years later. The United States has found out that BRI has been very successful. It has been very successful in linking South-South cooperation between China and the global South, particularly with Africa, which was supposed to be the lost and the forgotten continent. No? So for the West, Africa was a forgotten continent. It was not possible to do business, to do investments, to do trade, to do financing, infrastructure, etc. But China and the Belt and Road Initiative proved them wrong. China has been extremely active and productive and efficient in developing new relationships with Africa as a continent and with most of the African countries, but also in Latin America, also in Asia, and so with very specific projects, mainly in infrastructure. No? So the United States has suddenly found out that they are well behind the relationship regarding the global South if you compare it with China. And so in the last years, they have been trying to develop in old and some new institutions, such as the USAID, among others, specifically regarding financing for infrastructure, for example, in Latin America, a topic that was practically forgotten for decades. But since China is doing this successfully in the 21st century, they have found out that they have to do something similar because there is a large demand for such infrastructure projects in Latin America. No, again, several decades late, but still, no. I hope that Latin America and other countries can benefit from this new triangular relationship, and hoping that the confrontation between China and the United States gets not too tense, even in the military field. So tensions and contradictions, confrontations are not necessarily negative up to a specific point. No? If one of the members of this new relationship requires or requests that other members do not participate with China, then it gets very difficult, particularly if China is already in Mexico, in Brazil, in Latin America. China is already the number one trading partner, the second investor, hundreds of infrastructure projects, and suddenly requesting. Look, I would tell you that if the relation continues as it has happened in the last 5 to 10 years, expectations are that with some bumps, with some uncertainties, you can never be sure, hopefully not. But beyond that, everything shows that the region of Latin America and each of the countries will increase the relationship with China, even in the case of those countries that do not have a diplomatic relationship with China. I remind you, Central America and the Caribbean have 6 or 7 countries that still have diplomatic ties with Taiwan, no? One of the biggest are Paraguay and Guatemala. But again, we have to be very aware that the old rich guy in town, no, I would say China is the new rich guy in town, and the United States is the old rich guy in town. So the old rich guy in town, you might dislike him, you might hate him, you might whatever, but he's still very powerful, and particularly in Latin America. So you have to be aware of the sudden reactions of the old rich guy in town, no, because that will be important in Latin America. Again, I believe that most countries in Latin America are not afraid of the confrontation between the United States and China, but we have to be very aware because in many fields it's getting very ugly. No, again, I work in the academic field, and for example, it's very ugly that beautiful Confucius Institutes. We have one Confucius Institute at our university, and I believe it's a wonderful institution where they teach geography, history, culture, Chinese, of course, etc. And they were, in the United States, they were practically required to cancel all Confucius Institutes in many universities. No, I was a visiting professor at the University of Pittsburgh in 2020, and they, in 2020, just before the COVID-19 pandemic, and they closed it, no, as a requirement from the State Department, the Department of Defense, and other departments in the United States. So we have to be very clear that the confrontation today between the US and China will not allow us. I have been recently, last year, several times in China. It is a little bit surprising for me. I think many people in China believe or still hope that China and the United States can return to a pacific and old good relationship with the United States. That will not be possible. The Democratic Party, the Republican Party, they disagree on everything. But they agree, both parties, very strongly that they have to be very tough, very challenging, very strict against China. No? So we will not get back to the relationship of China with the United States as it used to be 10 or 15 years ago. Very unfortunately.